and fanaticism is becoming more and more common. Israel is becoming more and more fanatical. It's becoming more and more of an insane asylum of a country. This way of thinking that a lot of these Israelis are having, and this way of thinking that is growing, that says Palestinian equals terrorist, that is the same exact mentality that the Germans had, that the Nazis had. Jew equals communist.
לא רק שולחת אותם, בדרך מוודא שיש מחנות ריכוז שגם ישרפו אותם.
And so if I say there's going to be a massive Holocaust tier genocide on the Palestinians, people will say, what? Israel is a civilized society, but look at the writing on the wall. Israel is becoming an insane asylum. And also you have people who are black Americans, and they say, police officer automatically equals racist. White police officer automatically equals racist, right? It's this absolutist, all or nothing, super violently black and white way of thinking that is going to lead us to our demise. Truly, it's going to lead us to our demise. All right, everyone. So I want to tell you guys about extremism. I want to talk to you guys some more about this topic. This is a very interesting topic, but at the same time, it is very disturbing because a lot more people are getting into extremism. A lot more people are getting into extremist ways of thinking. We have been seeing this in the United States. We have been seeing this in Europe, and we are seeing this in Israel. Now, we see this in the United States with how much racial tension is increasing. We have people who are giving money over to a legal defense fund to help some guy who stabbed some guy to death because his victim was a white guy. And so they are supporting this guy. They're supporting this criminal because, well, he's black and his victim was white. So they're thinking, yeah, he stabbed that whitey, he stabbed that guy. So we're going to defend him because, brothers, we always getting mistreated by the system. And so, to hell with that white guy, to hell with white people, blah, blah, blah. So we're seeing that way of thinking becoming very, very common, as scary as that is. And then we see on the other side of the coin, a lot more people coming out and saying things like, those black people, they're a bunch of N-words, and black people are biologically determined to have low IQs. They are biologically determined to be adjacent to mental retardation or to be adjacent to retarded people. I mean, you see this sort of talk, and it's very, very dark, and it harkens back to a very dark and evil past that we have in America's history where eugenics was very, very common. And so we see extremism in the United States, and we are also seeing extremism in Europe. We definitely see this happening in Germany, where the second biggest party is the Alternative for Deutschland party, which is an ultra-nationalistic, ultra-militaristic German party. Now, if you hear about a party in Germany that is extremely militaristic and they are very nationalistic, and by the way, the party is talking about Germany becoming a nuclear-armed country, so they are ultra-nationalistic, ultra-militaristic, and they want Germany to have nukes. And I don't know if you guys are history buffs, I don't know if you guys are into reading history, but that is quite scary. That is quite disturbing. That should ring alarms in our minds, at least, just given the history. And then we have Israel. Oh, Israel. Now, we were told as children and as teenagers that we must revere Israel. We have to revere Israel or else God is going to curse us. But now, we look at Israel today and we find ourselves disillusioned. We find ourselves disillusioned when the boomers are still stuck in the 1990s. They're still stuck in the early 2000s when John Hagee was very famous and he had a book called Jerusalem Countdown. And that damn book sold 1 million copies. I still don't know why that piece of garbage asswipe of a book sold so many copies when it was really just, worth toilet paper. That's really what it was. It was complete garbage. But a lot of people bought into that stuff. They thought it was great. And now young people are looking at Israel and they're watching Tucker Carlson, they're looking at Theo Vaughn, and then they're reading about Israeli war crimes, and they're like, Dad, Uncle, Mom, Grandma, Grandpa, what the hell? This country is getting more and more fanatical. And it is. Israel is becoming more and more fanatical. it's becoming more and more of an insane asylum of a country. Now, to demonstrate this, I want to tell you guys about a poll that was done recently, and Haaretz did an article about this. Very disturbing find. There was a poll that was commissioned in March of this year by Pennsylvania State University, and it was conducted by an Israeli researcher named Tamir Sorek, and he was doing this poll for the Israeli polling firm Geocartography Knowledge Group. I know I have difficulty saying geocartography, but that's the name of the firm, the polling firm. And the survey, according to the Haaretz article that I'm reading right now, the survey polled a representative sample of 1,005 Jewish Israelis. And here are the results. Here are the results. Here is this amazing country that's just the perpetual epitome and exemplification of all things civility. So it says here that according to the results, 82%, that is a huge, whopping ass majority. 82% of respondents supported the expulsion of Gaza's residents. And get this, it gets worse, 56% favored expelling Palestinian citizens of Israel. So now you're going to sit there and say, Ted, they're just against the Gazans because the Gazans are terrorists and the Gazans voted for Hamas and the Gazans are whatever and blah, 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 right? They're all terrorists and that's why, and 7th of October, et cetera, right? So that's why they don't like the Gazans. But they're also going against Israeli Arabs. Now, what do we always hear about from the Hasperists? Now, for those of you who don't know, the Hasperists are propagandists for Israel. Haspera means propaganda. That's what Haspera means, propaganda. So the Hasperists, or the apologists for Israel, love to say, hey, Israel is a democratic, civilized society. Look, 21% of our population are Arabs. We have millions of Arabs living in Israel, and they are treated as equal citizens. And hell, look, we have a judge in Israel's Supreme Court who's an Israeli Arab. You see, we have a political party in the Knesset that represents Israeli Arabs. Look, we are a democracy. And I will say, listen, I want to be fair, because now I just want to make a clarification here. There are a lot of people who hate Israel for bad reasons. They hate Israel. They're now I don't hate Israel, right? And I don't agree that we should hate Israel. But they are people that are, hate is not the right word for the sentence that I'm about to articulate. They are people who criticize Israel with bad intentions. They say, I'm critical of Israel because Israel's doing war crimes. And it's like, okay, fair enough. But then they say, oh, by the way, the Holocaust didn't happen and Hitler was a great guy. And I just have to say, hold up, wait a second. What are you talking about? That's insane. Why are you criticizing Israel for doing war crimes and then simultaneously supporting one of the biggest mass murderers in the history of humanity? Oh, it's because you're not really criticizing Israel for good reasons. You're criticizing Israel because you just hate Jews and you love Hitler. So that is a real phenomenon, and that is a phenomenon that is growing. I mean, just look at Kanye West. You have people saying Heil Hitler. It's pretty disturbing. So, but that's the world we're living in, right? We're living in a world where extremism is becoming more and more common. So that is really just a presaging sign of this reality. It is an indication of the zeitgeist that we are currently living in. But you see, if I say I'm critical of Israel, and then someone comes out and says, wait a second, hold on, 21% of Israel's population is Arab, and we have a democracy, and we have politicians who are Arab, and we have a judge who's an Arab, etc., I will say that is all granted. Absolutely. I am not going to deny that. In fact, I have to give credit to where credit is due, and I have to commend Israel for having such a society. Now, I just want to add something here. My father was born in the West Bank. My father grew up and was raised in the West Bank. My father grew up as a Palestinian. Now, eventually my dad moved to the States when he was just 18 years old, but nonetheless, my father was brought up in the West Bank. He was brought up with pro-Palestine nationalistic ideology. He was brought up as a Muslim, and my father was raised to hate Israelis, Jewish Israelis. He was raised to hate Jews. He was told as a young man growing up that the only bad thing about Adolf Hitler is that he did not finish the job. This is the type of stuff this is the type of rhetoric that my dad heard while he was growing up. And when my dad was growing up in in the West Bank, he was he had, of course, television, and the television was controlled by the state of Israel because this was before the whole Oslo Accords thing happened. So my dad was under military occupation, and he would watch television, and the television was controlled by Israel, and the Israeli government would make sure that documentaries on the Holocaust would be played, which is totally good. Right? That's a great idea because you want to educate the people on how the Jews suffered under fascism, how the Jews suffered under German nationalism, Nazism. And so you want them to understand, hey, this is why the Jews came here, because no one liked the Jews before World War II. Centuries before World War II, no one really liked the Jews. They were kicked out of all these countries. And then the apex of anti-Jewish sentiment was manifested in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, during the Second World War, and we call this event the Holocaust, as everyone knows. Well, I hope everyone knows. In fact, I think a lot more people don't even know about the Holocaust than we would like to think, right? A lot more people really don't know much about the Holocaust. A lot more than we would like to think. But anyway, so my dad would watch these documentaries, and Palestinians, my dad would tell you that when he was growing up watching these documentaries showing Holocaust footage, showing footage from the death camps, Palestinians would watch those documentaries not to educate themselves. It wasn't a way just to get an education. They were watching those documentaries as a form of entertainment. They would watch these documentaries and laugh. So let me tell you guys something. Palestinians were alt-right before alt-right even existed. And I want to tell you guys this stuff because I don't want to be one of these types of people. I don't want to be this Norman Finkelstein type of a person that comes out and says, oh, like Israel does everything bad and Palestinians are saints, right? Palestinians are 100% good and the Israelis are 100% bad, and the Israelis are the absolute villains and the Palestinians are the absolute victims. And at the same time, though, I don't want to follow this Hagee-ish, boomerish way of thinking that says that the Palestinians are the absolute villains and the Israelis are the absolute victims. I don't want to have that mentality. We need to have a balance. And the problem is that anytime you get into the discourse of Israel versus Palestine, we end up getting into these extremes on both ends. We end up getting into these extremes on both sides of the coin. You have one side that says Hamas is great, Israel is absolutely bad, Hamas are a bunch of terrorist thugs. And then you have the other side that says Israel is 100% righteous, and the other side is absolutely evil. So growing up, my dad saw all this stuff, and then what happened? Right? What ended up happening was my dad realized, wait a second, I'm on the wrong side here. And he was right, because my dad was on an extremist side. That's the whole point. My father was an extremist. He realized his extremism and he said, I don't want any part of this anymore. So my father became pro-Israel. Now, why did my dad become pro-Israel? So let me tell you guys about someone named Moshe Yalon, better known as his nickname, Bogi. Bogi Yalon. Bogi Yalon is an Israeli politician, and he is an Israeli Jew, and he is someone who has quite a long history in Israeli politics. Here's the thing, though, is that Bogi Yalon is saying, listen, I am against exterminating the Palestinians. I am against this idea of just exterminating the Palestinians, etc., etc.
הם רצחו אותנו, אנסו אותנו, שדדו אותנו, חטפו אותנו, רצחו ילדים קטנים, נשים, אנסו. אתה לא יכול להגיד דבר כזה אחרי מה שהם עשו. צריך למחוק את עזה. ברקו. למחוק את עזה. ברקו. עזה הייתה צריכה לקבל... למחוק את עזה. עזה הייתה צריכה לקבל מכה שלא כתובה בתורה. אבל אתה אומר... אתה מבקר את זה.
את המכה הזאת ביקרת.
תשמע. אתה מבקר את זה.
אתה יודע.
בוגי, טעית.
אני לא מקבל את זה.
מותר גם להגיד טעיתי.
אני חושב שצבא הגנה לישראל צריכה לתת להם מכה שלא כתובה בתורה.
אבל אתה אומר למה...
אבל בלי לפגוע.
בלי לפגוע במי?
אין חפים מפשע בעזה?
אין, כולם מחבלים.
כולם.
רגע,
רגע. על זה אני חלוק עליך.
אז אתה טועה.
יש שם נשים,
בוגי,
יש שם ילדים.
כשהם חטפו לנו את הילדים, הם כולם חיכו להם עם סוכריות
אז אני לא
וצהלו
מסכים
שם.
איתך.
היו צריכים להרוג אותם במקום.
אני לא שולח חיילי צה"ל להרוג את כולם. אני בא להרוג כולם.
רגע, חברים,
אתה יודע,
מר
יעלון, אתה יודע שגם הממשלה הנוכחית לא שולחת את חיילי צה"ל ואומרת, תהרגו כל מי שבא ליד, או תהרגו ילדים ונשים, וזאת אמירה מאוד מאוד בעייתית להגיד את זה, וזה לוקח אותי גם לעובדה שהאמירה הזו שלך על אותו תיאור אתני לכאורה במרכאות כפולות ומכופלות, יצרה סערה גדולה בעולם. יש לך תפקיד, מכוח התפקידים שהיית בעבר, צוטטת בכל כלי תקשורת בעולם. זה עשה נזק אמיתי.
מוריה, לשמחתי, מיד אחרי שאמרתי, הוציאו את הכוח הזה, ופתרתי פה בעיה להרבה מאוד אנשים, שכשהם הסתובבו בעולם, ישאלו אותם איפה הם היו.
בוגי, אבל למה הרחמים האלה? על מי אתה מרחם?
אני לא מסכים איתך,
על מי אתה מרחם? זה כולם שם מחבלים בעזה. על מי אתה מרחם? הם שחטו אותנו פה ב7 באוקטובר.
אני מסכים איתך שצריכים לחטוף מכה כשלא כתובה בתורה.
מה זה מכה? צריכים למחוק את עזה.
טוב, אתה אומר ככה, אני לא מוכן, לא.
צריך להגיד,
Now, if you were to ask my dad, why did you become pro-Israel? He would tell you because of Israelis like Bogi Alon. Bogi Alon is an Israeli, and he is against terrorism. At the same time, he is for civility. At the same time, he is not in favor of war crimes. He is not in favor of atrocities. So my dad would tell you, because of Israelis like Bogi Alon, he realized that extremism is not the correct route to take. But now, what do we see? We see people like Bogi Alon being attacked by his fellow Israelis because he doesn't agree with doing mass extermination of the Palestinian population. He doesn't agree with this whole idea of doing genocide. So what's happening in Israel? What's happening is the civility that established the type of society that Israel has, the type of society that the Hospirists love to present, is declining. That civility is declining, and fanaticism is becoming more and more common. And we see this in this recent poll. Now, the Hospirists will say, well, we have all these Arabs living here, and that is a sign that Israel is a civilized democracy. Okay, fine, granted. But what I would argue is that this civility that you speak of is eroding, it is declining, and we can see this in the very fact that according to this poll, as seen on this poll, 56% of Israelis want to ethnically cleanse not just Palestinians in Gaza or Palestinians in the West Bank, but Israeli Arabs. Now, what did I say not too long ago? I said that eventually there's going to be a genocide of the Palestinians. Now you would say, well, there already is a genocide. I'm not talking about a situation where you have just airstrikes and drones, etc. What's been happening in Gaza, in my opinion, is a sample of what is to come. I understand that what's been going on in Gaza is atrocious. I mean, for crying out loud, they're shooting people as they're trying to get food for their children in aid distribution centers. I mean, this is what's been happening in Gaza. It really is terrible. It really is awful. But what I'm saying is that it's going to get worse. And eventually, the fanatics of Israel are going to orchestrate to the Palestinians something akin to what happened to the Jews during the Second World War. I'm talking about camps, death camps, that sort of thing. And I said, first they will go after the Palestinians in the Palestinian territories. The Gazans, I mean, they're already going after the Gazans, but they will eventually go after the people in the West Bank, and they already have to a certain extent. We see this in Jenin, but it's going to get worse. And I said, eventually, they're going to go after the Israeli Arabs. So first they're going to go after the Palestinians. Then they're going to go after the Israeli Arabs. It's not going to stop with just the people in Gaza or the people in the West Bank. It's going to escalate further into Israel proper. Now, I saw this video recently, and this really does demonstrate this. This really is it's a microcosm of what I'm talking about here. I saw a video recently in which a guy was interviewing random Israelis on the street, asking if they agree with doing ethnic cleansing. And this YouTube channel, I think it's called Jill Schuster. It is an interesting YouTube channel because it's just videos of him talking to random people in Israel and also people in East Jerusalem. So it gives you an idea of how Israeli society is like. But anyway, in this video, he's talking to this Israeli woman. And he asks her, okay, do you think that it's a good idea to just ethnically cleanse the people of Gaza? And she says in Hebrew, she says, I think we should do a mass deportation of all the Gazans. We should kick all of them out of Gaza. Okay, but she doesn't stop there. She didn't stop there. She went further than that. She said, and not only that, I would set up concentration camps, put them in the camps, and incinerate them.
היית תומכת בתוכנית מסודרת לשלוח את כל העזתים למדינה שלישית שלעולם לא יחזרו?
אם זה תלוי בי,
כן, תלוי.
לא רק שולחת אותם, בדרך מוודא שיש מחנות ריכוז שגם ישרפו אותם. If you want me to answer this in English, I would be more than happy to answer it.
Go for it.
The people from Gaza came over and destroyed us all on October 7th. Not only the people that they hurt physically, they hurt everybody's heart, all the Jews all over the world. And for this, I would send them as far as possible, one-way ticket, never come back. Thank you so much.
And I'm thinking, okay, either this woman read the Nazi playbook or she is possessed by the very demon that influenced the Nazis and the Ottomans. Now, either or, she's definitely influenced by infernal forces, but still, I mean, what she described is exactly what the Germans did to the Jews. It's exactly what the Ottomans did to the Armenians. Now, in the case of the Jews, and I'm bringing up the Jewish Holocaust because this really hits right at home in Israel, the Germans didn't tell the Jews in the beginning, hey, get on the train because we're going to kill you. We're going to put you in gas chambers or we're going to do mass executions. And we're going to force you to endure human experimentation. No. That's not what the Nazis did. They said, get in this truck and we're going to just take you away. Yeah, we're going to have you work, because it's really important that we get enough labor as possible. So just get in the truck. And it reminds me of this book that I read recently. It's called East-West Street by Philip Sands. And he talks about how his family suffered through the Holocaust. And he talks about how his family in Austria went through the Holocaust. And he talks about how he had these two relatives. I think one of them was his grandma and one was his great-grandmother, if I remember correctly. Regardless, he talks about how these two relatives of his were in Austria. They were Jewish. And he talks about how the Austrian Nazi forces went through the neighborhood and they wanted to do a purge of the neighborhood of all the Jews. And so the Nazi Austrian officers, they went through the street, prowling about looking for Jews, and they said, Action, get all the Jews out of the buildings. And so they went to this apartment building and they said, all the Jews get out of the building. So all the Jews got out of the building. They forced them out of the building, and then they took these two elderly women who were relatives of this author, and they told them to get into this vehicle. Now, as they were getting into the vehicle, there were a whole bunch of, and this is really, really crazy, because you would never expect to see this sort of thing today, although I will say, given the extremist groundswell that we are currently living in, it wouldn't be that surprising to see this sort of thing happening in the future. But Austrian civilians, regular Austrian people, were walking around watching these Jews being forced into these vehicles, and the Austrians were clapping their hands, all right? Clapping their hands as these Jews were being forced into the vehicles. And they said, okay, we're going to take you to work. Oh, okay. And, Germany, Austria, these were considered to be very civilized countries. I mean, they were very industrial countries. Germany was certainly this big global center for technological innovation and medicine. So, I mean, Jewish people really didn't expect for this sort of thing to happen, given the prestige of Germany and Austria. But it did happen. And so they put these Jews on this vehicle, and then they drove them away to the train station. And so you would think, okay, Holocaust, Jews in the Holocaust being put on a train. You're thinking in your mind a very ugly train. You're thinking a train, something out of Schindler's List, big, loud, squealing noise coming out of the train, smoke billowing out of its chimney, looks very ominous, very scary. No, that is not what happened. That's not how it looked like. The Germans were very good at putting people at ease. They were Europeans with suits. Oh, how are you doing? Please get into the train. So they put him in this train. Now you think, okay, the train is just going to be a bunch of people crammed together in one of those in a dungeony looking train car. No, that's not how it looked like. It was a very regular, very normal civilian passenger train. They served people meals, I'm sure. Everyone had a table. It was very relaxing, and it really put your guard down. You really thought, okay, I mean, this isn't too bad. So you got on the train. It felt very comfortable. It was no different than just a regular train ride. And then all of a sudden, you end up in a death camp. And those two relatives of Philip Sands were executed. So that's how it happened. That's how it happened. The Holocaust wasn't, oh, we're going to kill all the Jews. You know, Hitler was evil, but he wasn't this raving lunatic of an individual doing his speeches saying, we're going to kill all the Juden. We're going to kill all the Jews. That's not how it worked. They told them, we're going to deport you, and then they killed them. So this Israeli woman, she is, whether she knows it or not, and either way, she is influenced by the very infernal forces that influenced the Nazis. But what she is describing in that video is exactly what the Nazis did to her people. It's exactly what the Nazis did to her people. And this way of thinking that a lot of these Israelis are having, and this way of thinking that is growing, that says Palestinian equals terrorist, that is the same exact mentality that the Germans had, that the Nazis had. Jew equals communist. Jew equals Bolshevik. Right? That is the exact mentality that the Nazi Germans had. And the strategy, not the strategy, but the policy, the protocol of the Nazi government when it came to the war in the Soviet Union, because remember, the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. The policy was, where there are partisans, you will find the Jews. That was the policy. So partisans, by the way, were people who fought the Nazis in the Soviet Union. They were not professional soldiers. They were more like guerrilla fighters. And the partisans, you know, they had them in France, but they also had a lot of them in the Soviet Union. The partisans would do ambushes on the Germans, and they would also blow up their railroads so that they could ruin the logistical operations of the German war effort in the Soviet Union. They were pretty effective, actually, and they did make a big difference in the fight against Nazism in the Soviet Union. But the policy was, where you find the partisans, you will find the Jews. So if you were in a battle with some partisans and you killed the partisans, then you would find the nearest village and you went in there and you massacred the village. And you said, okay, where are the Jews? Just like in that movie, Come and See. You know, there's the film Come and See. If you have not seen this movie, my God, this movie is a masterpiece. One of the greatest films ever made, definitely on my top 10 list of best movies of all time. But in that movie, there is a scene where the Germans, you know, they find people with guns and they say, okay, they go into this village and they just exterminate the village. I mean, it is a very visceral, very real, graphic scene, very realistically done. But that's what they did. And you see, that way of thinking came from an extremist source. It came from an extremist way of thinking. It was this absolutist way of thinking. Jew equals communist. So the Israelis are adopting more and more this absolutist way of thinking that says Palestinian equals terrorist. Arab Israeli equals either terrorist or terrorist sympathizer. And you see people adopting this sort of mentality in the United States when it comes to African Americans. Black equals criminal. So people are, and also you have people who are black Americans, and they say, police officer automatically equals racist. White police officer automatically equals racist, right? It's this absolutist, all or nothing, super violently black and white way of thinking that is going to lead us to our demise. Truly, it's going to lead us to our demise. And it's the same way of thinking that people had during the French Revolution. Oh, you support the king? Beheaded. You support the Catholic Church? You deserve to be beheaded. And that's why there were so many beheadings in the French Revolution. It was because of this fanatical way of thinking. And that way of thinking is plaguing Israel, and it's growing. But it's not just Israel. I don't want to just single out Israel. It's also happening in Europe, where you have more and more people cultivating a sympathy for the Third Reich, cultivating a sympathy for the Nazis. And we see this reflected in the fact that the second biggest party in Germany is the AfD. And Bjorn Holke, one of the big leaders of that party, by far the most famous leader of the AfD, is someone who used to write articles under the... he wrote articles under the pseudonym, I think it was Landolf Landling or something like that. Landolf Laddig, I think, was his pseudonym. And this guy, under this pseudonym, he would write articles praising the Third Reich, saying, well, only if the Third Reich were allowed to exist a little bit longer, the rest of the world or many countries would have wanted to imitate the Third Reich. I mean, this is the way of thinking that this guy has. And they're ultra-nationalists, and they're tired of hearing about the Holocaust. And here's the thing. A lot more Germans are tired of hearing about the Holocaust because they have this idea that, well, we want to bring back German nationalism, and we know that if we bring back German nationalism, we're going to be called Nazis. So let's not talk about the Holocaust. Let's not talk about this evil of our country's past, because we want to bring back nationalism. And they know that bringing back nationalism in Germany, ultranationalism in Germany, cannot happen without this hearkening back to Nazism. Or it can't happen without people saying, hold on a second, are you sure you guys aren't reviving Nazism? So they just want us to shut up about the Holocaust. They're tired of hearing about it. And this way of thinking is becoming more and more common. And the thing is that, and this is very disturbing, you have these Zionists who are working together with right-wingers from Europe. They're working together with the far right in Europe. And you have Israelis saying that they love the AfD. You see, this is what I'm talking about. Why do they love the AfD? Because they're fanatics, and the AfD is also filled with fanatics. So these two fanatics, regardless if one is Jewish and the other one is German, these two fanatical groups see eye to eye. The woman who says we should deport all the Palestinians and then set up death camps and incinerate them is of the same spirit as the Germans who murdered her ancestors, and it's of the same spirit as the Germans who want to revive nationalism today. Bjorn Holke. Okay, now if I told these Israelis, I think we should really just stop talking about the Holocaust. Right, they probably wouldn't like that. But that's what Bjorn Holke says. He says we need to have a 180-degree shift on how we talk about the Holocaust or how we see the Holocaust. Now, mind you, this is a guy who used to write articles praising the Third Reich. So it's quite obvious what his goals are. His goal is to bring back Nazism. It really is that obvious. But you have Zionists who are saying that the AfD are good guys. Now, you see, this is what fanaticism leads to. Fanaticism leads to very strange bedfellows. And it also leads to people who have evil ideologies to work with other people who also have evil ideologies that overlap with each other. And so that's why you'll see Zionists working with Nazis. Because they see eye to eye. They have the same mentality. And if you look at the Nazi mentality, the Nazi mentality was Jew equals communist. And if you look at the Israeli far-right mentality, it says Palestinian equals terrorist. And you see, that is the reason why Israelis don't mind destroying an entire neighborhood and wiping out entire families in the name of fighting terrorism. Because in their eyes, they're all terrorists. Just like when the Germans would enter a village in Europe, they would wipe out the whole village. Because in their eyes, well, all these villagers, they're pro-partisan, they're pro-communist, therefore they are pro-going against our country. Now, I want to give you guys an example of what I'm talking about here, as far as German history goes. So, this is a book that I'm currently reading. It's called Denying the Holocaust. And so far, it has been very educational. This book is really a study on Holocaust denialism. Very interesting stuff. And she shows that Holocaust denialism is not really as it presents itself. right? It's not really what it presents itself as. Holocaust denialism presents itself as just a bunch of learned, objective men or women who simply want to get to the bottom of history. We simply want to know the truth of what happened in the Holocaust. That's all. We're not Nazis, blah, 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 blah. But what she does is she shows, I sound kind of like an English guy there, it shows, but what she does is she shows how these Holocaust deniers are actually just Nazis. And the reason why they present Holocaust denialism is because they want to bring back Nazism. They want people to actually look with favor towards Nazism. So they know that if they try to bring back Nazism, they know that if they try to revive Nazism, they're going to be accused of being Nazis. So how do you revive Nazism without sanitizing the criminal record of the Nazis? How do you bring up Nazism without making the Nazis look like the good guys? So part of reviving Nazism is to change how we see the Holocaust. And that's why Bjorn Holke said that Germany is the only country in the world that will have a monument of shame. And he was pointing to a Holocaust memorial. And he said, I'm sick and tired of seeing these memorials. That's basically what he was saying. Why? Because he wants to bring back Nazism. And so in order to bring back Nazism, you have to convince people that Nazism is great. And in order to do that, you have to present this image that the Nazis actually were the good guys in World War II. So she talks about, this author, her name is Deborah Lipstadt. She talks about this massacre that happened during the Second World War. This massacre that happened in this town in Czechoslovakia. The town was called Lidice. But the town of Lidice was blamed for the assassination of a major Nazi leader by the name of Reinhard Heydrich. Reinhard Heydrich was assassinated. And so the Germans pointed to Lidice and they said, the people of Lidice are responsible for the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. So what did the Nazis do? They butchered the town. And there was a famous Holocaust denier by the name of Austin J. App. Now, Austin J. App is one of the fathers of Holocaust denialism. He was an American professor of English literature, so a very educated person. And he really provided this credibility because he was a professor. He provided this academic credibility for Holocaust denialism. And I just want to read to you guys an excerpt from this book. So it says that initially he, Mr. App, focused on a few limited atrocities, such as the German massacre of the inhabitants. Now look at how App tries to justify the massacre of the people of Lidice. Initially, he focused on a few limited atrocities, such as the German massacre of the inhabitants of the Czechoslovakian town of Lidice. When Nazi leader Reinhard Heydrich was assassinated in May of 1942, the Germans claimed that the villagers of Lidice had helped his assassin. They killed all the men in the village, 192 in all, as well as 71 women. The remaining 198 women were incarcerated in Ravensbrück, where many of them died. And Ravensbrück was a terrifying place because that's where they would do human experimentation. Of the 98 children who were put into educational institutions, no more than 16 survived. Lidice was razed to the ground. The annihilation of this town elicited an intense reaction from the American public, but App contended, according to international law, the killings were justified because the Germans had executed everybody who aided political murders. And American law would have supported such action. So, not only did this guy deny the Holocaust, but he would go on to actually justify Nazi atrocities. Which really goes to show that basically what these Holocaust deniers are saying is the Holocaust didn't happen, but if we take power, we're gonna make it happen. That's really what they're saying. Now, apply this to the Israeli Jewish radicals, the far right of Israel. They say, we have no intention of genociding the Gazans. We have no intention of doing these things, right? We just want to kick these people out. Or you can tell them about an actual war crime, and they will say, Those war crimes didn't happen. But what are you really trying to say? Because look at the situation in Gaza. You have people going to these aid distribution centers getting massacred. This has happened several times. Now, right from the beginning, the Hosperis said, nope, didn't happen. And if it did happen, it was done by Hamas. And they said, oh, it was done by Hamas. But then you look at the evidence. For example, we have footage showing Palestinians running, and we can hear gunfire. And this, there was an article that was published by CNN in which it talked about this investigation. They brought the video to a military arms expert, and he listened to the video and he said, yeah, I know that gunfire. That is the sound of gunfire that is consistent with an Israeli firearm, an Israeli, I believe, some kind of a machine gun that would be attached to a Merkava tank, an Israeli Merkava tank. There was a doctor who pulled a bullet out of a child, or he pulled a bullet out of a civilian, and he showed a picture of the bullet. And so an expert, he is an expert on bullets, etc., and he looked at that bullet and he said, yeah, that's a bullet that would be used on an Israeli firearm that would be placed on an Israeli tank. And then we have all the witnesses coming out and saying, it was Israelis. Israelis fired on us. Now, regardless of all this evidence, the Israeli fanatics will come out and say, it's all bullshit, it's all a lie. How are they different from the Holocaust deniers? And what is really the mentality of the Holocaust denier? The mentality of the Holocaust denier is, the Holocaust didn't happen, but if it were up to me, I would make it happen. That's the mentality that we're dealing with. It's like the Ottoman or the Neo-Ottoman nationalist mentality. The Neo-Ottoman nationalist mentality says the Armenian genocide never happened. But if they could make it happen, they would. And how do we know that? Because of what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh in the early 2020s. From 2020, I want to say up until 2023 or up into 2023, they were crimes that were done to the Armenian people of Nagorno-Karabakh. And after the Nagorno-Karabakh War of 2020 was over, there were war crimes that were committed, including beheadings and executions. And I know this for a fact because you can see the videos. So the Ottomans, the Neo-Ottomans or the Turkish nationalists will say, oh, we would never do an Armenian genocide, but given the opportunity, they butchered Armenian civilians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And just to be clear, the butchery was done by Azeris, but Azeris are actually Turks. And the saying, the slogan in Azerbaijan in regards to Azerbaijan's relationship to Turkey is that we are one nation, two states. So they're actually just Turks. So the hard right mentality of Israel is what? Oh, that's not happening. War crimes aren't happening, but they don't really mind that these things are happening. Now, how do I know this? Because look at the actions. Look at the actions of the IDF in the Net Stream corridor. You can read about it. Haaretz has done numerous articles on this. They actually spoke to IDF soldiers who fought in the Net Stream corridor, and they told Haaretz about the things that they saw. And they talked about how they saw IDF soldiers sniping people, killing people, laughing as they were killing people who were really just civilians. And then we have the New York Times coming out with an article that was extremely, extremely damning, and it caused a big uproar in the Hosperis community. And you see in this article the X-ray images showing children with bullets inside of their bodies. You see one X-ray showing a child's skull with a bullet in his skull. One X-ray showing another child, a bullet in his neck. And these are sniper bullets. They're sniping kids. And they're doing it for fun. They're doing it for fun. And now they'll say, well, we're not doing anything bad. We're just fighting terrorists. But then you look at this. So what does this tell us? It tells us that the mentality that we're dealing with is the same mentality as that woman that I showed you earlier. In Hebrew, she says, I would incinerate all of them in death camps. And then in English, she flips it around and says, oh, I simply want to just push them out of Gaza. I don't want to do war crimes. This is the dishonest / genocidal mentality that we're dealing with. Now, you'll say, well, Ted, there's going to be no genocide of the Palestinians. It's not going to happen, blah, blah, blah. Before every single genocide in history, this is exactly what the victims would say before they were genocided, right? It's not going to happen to us. They're not going to go after us. This is what the Jews of Europe thought. They need us, Jews. We're so innovative. We're so active in the community. A lot of us are doctors. A lot of us are engaged in very professional careers. Why would they get rid of us? They need us. They need us. And, well, that wasn't the case. The Armenians had the same mentality before the Armenian genocide. The Ottomans aren't going to kill us. We do so well in the Ottoman Empire. We have a lot of really good professional jobs. A lot of us are in the agricultural center of the Ottoman Empire. Why would they genocide us? And guess what? They got genocided. It's like if we were to go back to ancient Judea before the crucifixion of Christ, and we saw Christ, and what was Christ preaching, right? What would we be seeing Christ saying if we were back in that time? We would be seeing Christ saying things like, love your enemies, do good to those who hurt you, follow the spirit of the law, justice and mercy and charity, love your neighbor as yourself. And we would look at this man, Jesus, and we would think, wow, this is such a great man. He's preaching so many good things. And then someone would come along and say, you know, they're going to kill that man. What? How do you know? Well, I overheard the high priest talking about how they want to kill this man because he's a threat to their power. Really? Yeah, no, they wouldn't kill this man. He's preaching, Jesus, he's preaching exactly what Hillel was preaching. And you know, Hillel is one of the leaders of, he was one of the leaders of really one of the main schools of thought of Judaism. You had, back in those days, you had the two big schools of thought of Judaism. You had the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. Shammai was a racist, tribalistic, nasty individual. Hillel was a very kind man, and he taught to love your neighbor. He taught people to love their enemies and to not be angry with anyone. He had teachings of love and peace. And so Hillel died, obviously, before Jesus' ministry. And so when Jesus was preaching, Jesus was teaching people what Hillel was teaching. So what Jesus was trying to tell people was, hey, you guys are getting way too close to the teachings of Shammai, who was a racist, tribalist, and a fanatic. You guys are getting way too close to extremism. You guys need to follow what Hillel was teaching, which is a teaching of love and loving your neighbor and peace. Because remember, Hillel was before the crucifixion. So we have to consider Hillel within the context of the history of Judaism before the coming of Christ. We have to consider Hillel to be really a true teacher of God, because he was a part of the established priesthood that was established by God before the crucifixion. So Jesus was saying, you guys got to go back to Hillel. You guys are following the Shammai guy way too much. The Shammai was evil. He was a racist. He didn't want foreigners to be praying in the temple, and he was an evil person. But the school of thought of Shammai was the dominating school of thought in Judea in the time of Christ. And the Levites, the high priests, they were subscribers to the ideology of Shammai. Jesus was teaching what Hillel was teaching, more or less. And so, I mean, you would be listening to Jesus and you would think, wow, this is such a kind man. I mean, who would ever harm this man? And then someone would come to you and say, they're going to kill that man. And you would think, nah, they wouldn't do that. No, they're going to kill him. No, why would they kill him? He teaches such good ideas, peace and love and loving your enemy. And I mean, how could you go against this man? He heals the blind and the sick, and he heals the lepers, and he embraces the downtrodden. He embraces the most forsaken people of society. I mean, why would they go against this man? And the guy would say, no, listen, they're going to kill him. And not only are they going to kill him, they're going to kill him in the worst possible manner that you can kill someone in the Roman Empire. They're going to crucify him. They're going to nail him on a cross and have him suspended on nails on a wooden cross. And you wouldn't believe me, right? You wouldn't believe that person, but it happened. It happened. They're not going to kill all the Jews. Why would they do that? This is Germany. This is a civilized country. And they killed those people. They're not going to butcher the Armenians. Why would they do that? It's a civilized society. The Ottoman Empire, they need the Armenians. Hell, the Ottoman Empire is under the Young Turks. The Young Turks are believers in democracy. Hell, look, we have Armenians who are members of the Ottoman Parliament. This is what they were saying before the Armenian genocide, and they genocided those Armenians, and they took the two Armenians who were members of the Ottoman Parliament, and they murdered them by cutting them to pieces. And so if I say there's going to be a massive Holocaust tier genocide on the Palestinians, people will say, what? Israel is a civilized society, but look at the writing on the wall. Israel is becoming an insane asylum. Anyway, guys, you just heard some theology. God bless.